When I was 16 years old, and that was in 1960, I was very interested in the possibility that John Kennedy could become president, and my parents gave me a news magazine, and the very first copy in January of 1960 was a story about the Greensboro sit-ins by some young people who were only a year or two older than me. I think 18, 19 years old, sat in at a Woolworth store, cafe, and wanted coffee, and they were refused. Black people were not allowed to sit in most restaurants in the South, and they refused to leave, but were nonviolent and were hit, and things were thrown at them, and they were arrested. And this triggered in dozens, if not even maybe hundreds of places across the South, young people going to eating places and sitting in and trying to get served. I was very interested in the Kennedy campaign in 1960. I was active in it and handed out leaflets, and I met Robert Kennedy when he came to Rochester, New York. There were 4 high school students invited to meet with him at 7 o'clock in the morning at the Democratic Party headquarters, and I met Bobby Kennedy, and he was preparing the visit of Jack Kennedy the following week, and I had a chance to stand very close to the stage at that event, and it was a very powerful speech. 8,000 people packed into the Rochester, New York War Memorial, and Kennedy won a very narrow presidential victory. In 1962, I was a sophomore at Boston College, and in October was a very traumatic event for young people, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the people were very afraid that there was going to be a nuclear war and that we were all going to die. The Russians had missiles in Cuba. They were sending ships to supply them. Kennedy sent the American Navy to block the ships, and it looked like we might have an all-out war. A week after that, I hitchhiked to Holy Cross College. I was 30 miles or so away from Boston, and I was going to report as a reporter for the college newspaper, The Heights. I was going to report on a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, and he gave a very powerful speech about voting rights, which we're still dealing with today, and being a full citizen of this country as a person of color. And he said that, and all of us, there were 3,000 students listening to the speech. I was on the stage right near him because I was treated as a reporter, so I sat with the media. And the fellow next to me took a picture of King. So the picture of King that I have is right from where I sat. And after he gave his speech, in which he ended with the statement that the issue is not nonviolence or violence. The issue is nonviolence or non-existence. King was very, very strong on the issue that no progress could be made through violence. And the civil rights movement adopted that for all the early years anyways, and it was a very powerful thing. Many religious people were very attracted to it because of the nonviolence. At any rate, the students all filed out, and I was still on the stage, and Dr. King was all alone. He had he was putting his papers away, and I walked up to him and I said, "Dr. King, I would be proud to shake your hand." And he turned and looked at me right in the eye, and he said, "Young man, I'd be proud to shake your hand," which I thought was a very noble thing from this great man, famous man, one of the most talked about people in the world at that time. he raised me up and treated me as an equal, which I thought was very noble of him. That summer, I participated, in the spring, I participated in a freedom ride to Eastern Shore of Maryland, where I went with a group of young people. I think our leader was 17 years old, and a black young student, very articulate, very intelligent, and we went to a restaurant, in a little small family-style restaurant, and we were going to try to get served with this group of mostly black and a few of us whites, but they locked the door and closed the restaurant. So we picketed outside. And that summer, I had a job or a position. I didn't get paid, but I went out to New Mexico. I hitchhiked from Rochester, New York, to New Mexico. I took the $100 they gave me to pay my way, and I said, no, I want to hitchhike. I had done a lot of hitchhiking, back and forth to college, around going to high school. Very common in those days. And I decided I was going to hitchhike through Birmingham, Alabama. And I got a ride into Birmingham, Alabama, in a black limousine sort of thing, very new car. Some sort of I think a federal agent, FBI, Justice Department, I'm not sure. But it was during the early June. There had been confrontations in the streets with police dogs. Children had marched against the racial violence and been hit with water hoses, and it was very dramatic. And this guy came in and went right to the Kelly Ingram Park, 16th Street Baptist Church, where the black community organized their marches for civil rights. And he pulled right up next to the police, went over and was talking to us. I saw from a distance Bull Connor. He was the famous, very violent police guy. But I went over to the church, 16th Street Baptist, and there were several women and 3-4 young girls, and I just told them that I said, bless you, and I'm on your side, and I hope you overcome. And so I then hitchhiked all the way to New Mexico, and when we were on our way into Birmingham that day, this agent stopped, and we went go to the bathroom, and he got gas, etc., and I saw John Kennedy on the television.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the Scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution.
And he was saying to America that the civil rights issue was a moral issue, and that black folk were human beings and deserved to be treated as such. And I was very proud of him. That August, after I spent the summer in New Mexico, on August 28th, I got on a bus in Rochester, New York with black and white folk, and we went to the March on Washington. And I heard Dr. King, I heard John Lewis, I heard gave a interesting speech. Many white union leaders, white religious leaders, black leaders. But Dr. King, of course, gave the I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
And I was standing about halfway up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and saw the whole thing very, very clearly. Dr. King continued to press and broke many barriers to people participating in our society and getting the right to vote. But in 1967, he did something very controversial. In fact, it was exactly 1 year before he was assassinated. he gave a speech in New York City at the Riverside Church, famous big cathedral in New York City, where he came out very strongly against the war in Vietnam. And he marched to the United Nations and spoke there. And on that march, a friend of mine who was a Catholic priest was asked. There was Jewish rabbis, there was Catholic priests, there was Protestant ministers all around King because he had been threatened to be assassinated, and they wanted religious leaders to be around him, and that would hopefully protect him. Dr. Spock, famous children's doctor, also walked next to King. So he marched to the United Nations and came out against Vietnam. A year later, in Memphis, Tennessee, there was a strike of the sanitation workers, the garbage collectors, and they had been treated very badly, had very low salary, and they put on a very amazingly strong work stoppage for months, refused to go out, were hungry for a long time. The whole community rallied around, the whole black community and many whites rallied around them. And they had a march, but the young blacks were beginning to turn against Dr. King because they said, no, this nonviolence thing is ridiculous. These people are violent, and the only way you're going to overcome this is by using violence. And King totally disagreed with that. He believed the only real progress comes when people who are committed work hard and keep pushing for justice and equality and fairness, but don't use violence. And he, that night in Memphis, there was a march which broke into violence. The young black people confronted the police. The police began beating the young people. King was barely gotten away without getting injured. And he went back and they discussed what to do, and his entire staff said, do not go back to Memphis. You're going to get killed. And he said, well, the issue really is not whether Martin Luther King goes to Memphis to help the sanitation workers in their attempt to get a union. The issue is if Martin Luther King doesn't go to Memphis, what will happen to them? And so he decided, despite his almost universally, his whole staff saying, don't go, he went to Memphis and gave really the greatest speech of his entire career. People all know the I Have a Dream speech, but the greatest speech he gave was the night before he was killed, called the Mountaintop speech.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
And where it's an incredible speech. I wasn't there, I was at the other one, but I've heard it many times, and it was truly one of the greatest speeches, along with Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. I think it's the greatest speech in American history. But at any rate, and like Abraham Lincoln gave his second inaugural and a few weeks later was dead, assassinated. Martin Luther King gave the mountaintop speech where he said, I have been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land, and I'm not going to get there with you, but the black people of America are going to get to the promised land. They're going to get justice. They're going to get freedom. They're going to get the things that any other person in the country gets and deserves. And that's the speech he gave the night before. The next day he was assassinated. His head was blown off, just much like Lincoln. So at any rate, Martin Luther King, to me, was the greatest American, certainly that I ever met, that I ever shook a hand with, and one of the great people of the 20th century who called for peace, justice, equality, but nonviolence. Didn't mean go soft, go easy. Meant fight for things, but never use violence. Thanks a lot. I so appreciate my grandson Hayden for asking me to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, his life, and the meaning of his life.